And like last week, just so you all know who's presenting to you, I'm Bruce Black, and I'm the horticulture educator for Carroll-Lee and Whiteside County. And I'm happy to spend today with you again. So I'm going to turn my video back off, just simply so that we make sure that we're saving bandwidth and everybody doesn't have any issues. So we'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation of how to plan and manage a community garden. This is one of those topics that I really got my first connection with horticulture in. I started growing fruits and vegetables for my family in a garden, a backyard garden, when I was a kid. And then my first experience working with Extension was helping teach youth in a community garden. So this is one of those topics that I really am passionate about. And I love that there's plenty of interest in having more community gardens. And this presentation is simply to kind of give people a lot to think about when wanting to start a community garden, because we all have the passion to grow and teach others to be able to grow. But there's a lot of behind the scenes work that a dedicated few individuals usually do. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. And our objectives for today are to talk about really four areas that go into managing a community garden. The first one is setting up a planning committee, as well as talking about site selection, how to develop that site for a community garden, and then the overall organization for how that garden will work, what it's to be used for, and by who. All right, and there we go. So stage one, putting a plan together and putting a planning committee together. It's good to remember that sometimes not the first plan always goes well. So there's always a plan B, a C, maybe even a plan F, just depending on how things go. But in horticulture, as in gardening, experiment, see what works, and to quote one of my colleagues, throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. If it doesn't, try something different. So our first step in putting together a community garden is to determine the need or the desire of the community. What is needed? Is there some food insecurity, maybe a food shortage of fresh produce for your community? Do you have a higher level of poverty where you're trying to provide fresh access to food and produce to people who may not be able to get it? There are also community gardens that are strictly designated to rebeautification. If you have a downtown area or a warehouse district that has been abandoned and just has some old empty factories, one of the things that could be done is in that green space, work to put in some raised beds or some flower gardens to help spruce up that part of the city. Another type of need is education. So having a demonstration garden where your organization or a group of master gardeners or volunteers from your communities put in a garden to help teach the members of your community how to either grow fresh produce, how to grow flowers, introduce new varieties to your community. And then the other more common request that I hear working with Extension is a community organization has a request. So a local church, a food pantry, a homeless shelter has some green space, and they want to utilize that green space to help either their members of their organization or help fill one of the above knowledge or one of the above needs of their community. When putting together your organization or planning committee, it's good to think about who from the community can help benefit. Are there community partners such as the YMCA, the local hospital, social service agencies, Extension, and the Master Gardener Service? Can they be value members of this planning committee, and then everybody comes together to meet that common goal? You'll also want to look at local garden professionals, either folks who have gardened for many years, or people who work in the industry. So is there members of a garden center, a seed dealer, a greenhouse that's local that could help out in ways that either helps with plant knowledge or might be a connection for either discounted plants or maybe able to help with donations. The Master Gardener Group. So this is one of the groups that I work a lot with. Master Gardeners are volunteers who volunteer their time for Extension to share their knowledge and passion for growing plants with their community. So these are the folks that if you've ever called our office with a plant question, you may have gotten a call back from one of them. They do a local help desk every year. And the great thing about the Master Gardener Group is every county in our area, Carroll-Lee-Whiteside, as well as Ogle County and some of the other surrounding areas, have a Master Gardener Group locally. This is a group of folks that works with Extension, and Extension's in every county in Illinois, as well as I know we have some folks listening in from surrounding states. Extension Master Gardeners are in every state. So you have local Master Gardeners that can help out with plant questions, if you're noticing a disease or insect problem, as well as they do a lot of teaching for the community. Locally in our community area of Carroll-Lee-Whiteside County, we do 6 children's gardens throughout the summer where there's Master Gardener involvement. And I just think that's amazing, as well as some of the other demonstration gardens, community gardens, where they share that knowledge with the community. And then, of course, the other member of the community to always talk with is your local government. So talking with your mayor, your county board, to get them involved with your project, as well as they're the people that if there's going to be a zoning issue or something that you might need to think about locally based on your local government laws or ordinances, they're going to be the people that can help you with that. The other thing to think about is how many people do you need on this committee? I've served on a few planning committees for community gardens, and we've had upwards of 20 people and as few as 5 people. Depending on the organization and the committee, it's good to get folks involved, but you really need to have a good chairperson. They need to be well organized, able to maintain a level of professionalism when running the meetings, as well as helping and delegating to other members of the committee. Personally, I think depending on the type of committee you are putting together, having at least 2 people from, at least 1 person from every organization. And then if you're working with a host site that has, if you're working with a church that has different committees that they report to, like a grounds committee, having those people involved as well. So usually I say about 5 to 7, depending on the number of organizations and committees that you're working with. The other thing, once you get your committee together, one of the first conversations that you guys need to have, and usually this sometimes takes place before, but what is going to be the mission or benefit? And this relates back to that community desire or community need that we just talked about a minute ago. Is the benefit or mission of your garden to educate? And if it's going to focus on education, are you going to focus on community education, so educating everybody in your community? Are you going to specifically focus on the youth population or work with an after school or community-based daycare? With that, that might require a little bit more training on the part of your volunteers to work with youth if they haven't in the past. Another education type of garden could be a therapy garden, working with a local health provider, hospital, clinic. Do they want to put in a therapy garden for their patients to have an opportunity to take advantage of being in green space, getting fresh air, appreciating the beauty that plants and flowers can provide, as well as a mission or benefit of providing food to the community. Is it going to be a donation garden or a type of garden where members of the community can rent a portion of that garden, such as a raised bed, to grow their own produce? I'm a big fan of intergenerational teaching, and this is where folks of multiple ages, usually focusing on older adults teaching and passing down their knowledge to younger generations. And I really love this because I see the benefit and the positives that come out of this interaction. And thinking about the current times that we're in, I've been seeing some increases in people thinking about things that happened towards the Great Depression. So a big article that came out earlier this week was about people getting back into the process of gardening, on how the idea of victory gardens is coming back, more people growing fresh produce for their community during the current situation that we're in. And then, of course, a training garden would simply be teaching folks about different plants, planting techniques, how to diagnose plant issues, which is always a very fun one because everybody gets to play detective to figure out what's happening to the plants. And then beautification, we talked a little bit about. And then community initiative, this would be the community coming together to really focus on a need or an issue. For me, I work with a partnership group here in Lee County, and one of the things that we try and address is food insecurity in our community. And so we've worked with local organizations to put in a community garden and put our resources and support to help that community garden be the best that it can be. The other thing that you need to think about is the resources that are needed. And for this one is one that tends to come a little bit more easily. If you've got great community support, then a lot of the resources that you are going to need can be donated from your community. So having an organization or a community member with some land to donate for the purpose of a garden. Construction materials, if you are putting in raised beds or doing a container garden, you can work with local hardware stores or big box stores to get donations for those materials. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about soil testing and making sure that there are no issues with the soil, or if it needs any fertilizer or organic matter. Those amendments can also be donated by by garden centers, big box stores. There are national lawn care service organizations that they have broken bags of soil that they can't sell, so they donate to local organizations in need. You also need to think about what kind of plants you're going to be growing, whether this is going to be a food garden, a flower garden, thinking about what plants you're going to purchase from a garden center or big box store, what plants you're going to grow yourselves using seeds or transplants. And then the big one on here is water. Having close access to water is going to be one of those things that will make or break a community garden. As I'll share with you guys going forward in this presentation, the site where I did my first community garden, the water source was about 1/4 of a mile away. So we had to get inventive to have water for the garden. Tools, are these going to be self-provided by the participant, or are you going to have a shared supply of tools that everyone would have access to? Depending on the tools, this might require a place to store the tools, a protection method so that the tools don't walk off, whether that's a simple combination lock on the shed or a checkout sheet saying I borrowed these materials, will return at the end of the day. And then of course one of the other resources that's needed is volunteers or a maintenance schedule. Having volunteers, these are going to be the people that are looking after that garden, making sure that it's maintained in the common areas. They're going to be providing some maintenance or upkeep work. In the instance of a school garden, this might be the teacher or teachers involved in planning, going out there and weeding after hours, if or in the summer, if a garden is going during the summer and there are some volunteers that are needed to help maintain that garden after the kids have planted it, so that in the fall, when the kids come back, they still have that outdoor classroom to come back to. Budget. So thinking about how much are you willing to spend? Are you going to have upfront cost of making a garden, creating raised beds for your organization or your school, making a list of expenses that you're thinking. So some quick ones are who's going to pay the water bill, seed cost, plant cost, do you need some fencing or chicken wire to help protect from critters and people that would come take your food. Also thinking about fertilizer cost, mulch cost, and with that list of expenses, then you can think about who in the community can we help approach? Are there folks who would be willing to help sponsor this community or school garden? Are there donations that we can seek from either community or local businesses? Are there national grants or national horticulture businesses that we can approach to for those donations, like the lawn care services who can't use their broken bags, so they'll donate those to local gardens. And then the other thing is to think about is, do we charge a small fee to our participant? So if we're doing a community garden where the participant is going to have their own space that they and their family use, do we charge a $10, $20 fee for the season, and then upon proper taking care of, cleanup, do we return a portion of that, return all of it, or do we let them put that $20 towards next year reserving that spot? In a couple of the organizations that I've worked with their community gardens, they do use a fee structure, and it's $20 for a raised bed. And at the end of the season, a lot of the participants don't ask for that back. They'll keep it as a donation for the organization to help cover cost, or they'll put that towards their reservation of a garden next year. For the volunteer portion, this is one of my favorite tasks, or favorite parts of the job, is working with a number of different people to foster a mission of cooperation and education towards gardening for future generations. And so one of the models that I found for volunteers and volunteer management is the ISOCHAIR model, and this is from Texas A&M Extension. This is a model that's focused on having extension volunteers helping with that extension mission, but it can be adapted to any organization. So this model specifically focuses on how to work effectively with your volunteers while making sure that they're utilized well and not burning them out, and making activities meaningful and enjoyable for them so that they want to come back. And so ISOCHAIR is an acronym for the stages that you would go through for volunteer management. And so you would identify your volunteers, picking the right people for a specific volunteer position or volunteer job. So for a community garden, these are going to be people who have skills that would benefit or want to learn those skills of working with a community garden. One of the things during the identification portion is to think about volunteers have many reasons for giving their time and resources, and to make them feel valid and appreciate them so that they know that their time is well spent, that their work is meaningful, and that that commitment is flexible. So it's not a 9-to-5 job, it's not a 60-hour week position. Sometimes it can feel like that, but it shouldn't be. It's flexible. Hey, my grandkids are coming in for a visit. I won't be able to help out in the garden this week. I'm letting you know. So then you find somebody who can fill in, or somebody from that planning committee or organization fills in for that person. Selection, this is the process of studying the backgrounds of potential volunteers and motivating them for a position. Depending on the organization who's hosting this, they might have a screening policy in place. For example, with Extension, we do interviews with our potential volunteers. We do background checks. as well as sex offender checks, since our volunteers do work with youth, making sure that there are no red flags that come back. This also helps during that interview with a potential candidate to discuss the volunteer opportunities that are there, gauging what they're interested in, as well as what they prefer not to do. Everybody is unique in their own way. Some people love working with kids. Some people would rather not work with kids, and that's perfectly fine. Just making sure that you have an opportunity for everyone to participate based on their own strengths. Orientation, this is the process of familiarizing that volunteer with the group that they'll be volunteering with and what expectations are for volunteering with the garden. This could be when you share that mission statement with them, meet with fellow volunteers, as well as the participants for that garden. Training, this is developing those skills to help improve the quality of work. And in gardens, this is an ongoing process. So not everybody who comes to volunteer in a community garden starts off with really green thumbs. I will tell you, personal experience, I cannot grow some plants to save my life, and I am a trained horticulturist who knows how to deal with plants. But there are certain things that I myself have trouble growing. So again, everybody has their own strengths, and there are opportunities for providing that training and helping those people become successful in the organization. The other big thing during training that is the logistical side is helping people know what to do when there's an incident. So if somebody gets hurt in the garden, or there's been a theft of produce or tools, who to call, what assistance to offer, and what relevant information do they need to collect. This is a great opportunity to provide training that they can also take away for their personal life, and that they can utilize in their personal life, because it's one of those added benefits that they can take away from this experience. Utilization, this is providing opportunity for those volunteers to put their knowledge and skills into action. Recognition, this comes in two different forms. This can be formal recognition, where you have a banquet or a dinner or a party to honor your volunteers, putting news articles or giving out volunteerism pins for specific benchmarks or certificates. But the one that really seems to stick with the volunteers is that informal recognition. Hey, I noticed you helping out Susie today, and you had a really great way of explaining what was happening with her bean plant. And just that informal recognition, providing a pleasant work environment, timely information about new developments, those all can go a long way to helping your volunteers. The last one is evaluation, and this is going to be used for the gardening committee. And this is simply to, if you have a report to put together, you're utilizing some kind of benchmarks to make sure that things are going productively, smoothly, and then you can report on that. So that might be the number of hours that somebody is volunteering, the number of questions they're getting with that. And this can help obtain that valuable feedback or offer those desired results to stakeholders. And then support and supervision. It's always a recommended thing to provide that supervision or support if you're having a new trainee or it's a new project, being there, being present, letting them know that you have their backs, but also not taking over when it's either their project or it's their tasks to do. So stage 2, and I show this picture because this is the community garden where I got my start. This is in the middle of a 4-H camp. And as you can see here, this fenced in area, this is my garden area. And it is surrounded by tall grass that went to seed. And this is where we had to walk 1/4 of a mile or utilize our cars to bring buckets of water to this garden. It was a 60 by 100 foot square, 60 by 100 foot square garden that we utilized to teach visiting youth about how to grow vegetables. And the main reason why this was not mowed down is simply the 4-H camp did not have staff at this time to mow everything. And so it was one of those things that we had to deal with. So location, location, location. Where are you going to put this garden? Is it going to be a convenient, accessible place? If it is on a factory or warehouse property, what are some of those past uses? Are there going to be heavy metals or lead in the soil that need to be tested for? And if that's an issue, thinking about putting in raised beds. This one right here, insurance. Whoever the host site or organization is, or the landowner, having some kind of insurance so that if somebody trips, hurts themselves, injured themselves, there's some kind of insurance in place to help offset any kind of those issues. And then putting together a memorandum of understanding for participants, having rules, rights, responsibilities. This is where having that sheet where it's got simple garden rules on there, no perennials, no heavy cedars, no illegal substances can be grown. These are going to be things to think about. The perennial or heavy cedar issue is going to be if you're having a garden where they're renting the plot and they might not come back the next year. Site specifics, so once you have your site, thinking about, is there 6 hours or more of direct sunlight? Where's going to be the water? The soil type and characteristics. So in the picture here, this is that garden in the middle of the field. And this section of the garden, which was about half of it, was a heavy clay soil, and this was right after a light rain. So it wasn't even a heavy rain, but it was a light rain, and you can see all the ponding that's taking place, and all of the grass that is popping up that we had to deal with. In this instance, having a soil test, as this was in the middle of a camp, there shouldn't have been any problems there, but if there was any issues or anybody sprayed anything, having those tests done to make sure. And then identifying any local sources of weeds. If you have any perennial weeds that are coming up, like purslane, or in this case, grass was our major weed, because all of that grass had gone to seed and then was coming up year after year. And so here's a prime example. This is a photo of the youth with one of our volunteers working in that field or in that garden. And you can see, even though we had stayed up on weeding, we had weeded this prior, it was bare, the grass kept growing, and we couldn't compete. We had a week of heavy rain, and so we couldn't get into the garden. This garden was also 40 minutes outside of town, so it was a commitment of 40 hours there, or 40 minutes there, 40 minutes back, plus whatever time we spend in the garden to weed. But one thing that was great at the recommendation of our volunteers is using shredded newspaper to, or in this case, shredded paper from our office to mulch around the plants. The paper itself was biodegradable. It would provide some nutrients and carbon when it broke down, as well as helping to suppress the weeds around individual plants. And so the plants that these kids are weeding are actually tomatoes. And fun experience looking back on it now. Stage 3, so site development. This is where you're going to be thinking about the type of garden you're doing. So a donation garden would be fruits and vegetables that are grown by the community or a local organization to be donated to a food pantry, soup kitchen, or a homeless shelter. These can also be used to donate at a local community table. So over the past few years in Lee County, different organizations have set up community tables where members of the community can drop off their excess produce at either the health department, the hospital, a local church, and then anybody who's in need can come and take what they can use. A school garden, also used as outdoor classrooms, providing excellent hands-on education for kids. The school curricula would help reinforce or help be reinforced through planting, cultivating, and harvesting the fruits and vegetables. And also allows the children to learn valuable lessons such as working in a team, lessons in decision making, different life skills, compassion, not only for members of their community or their school, but also compassion for nature. So not squashing the spider in the corner, because that spider is actually keeping those bad insects out of our garden. Neighborhood gardens. So this would be several gardens in a neighborhood by each person in the neighborhood, where you are working collectively to share produce equally. So if somebody has a yard that is excellent for tomatoes, but terrible for cucumbers. One of the other neighbors can focus on cucumbers, and then all of the members of that neighborhood garden collective can share the produce equally. This also helps provide beautification for green spaces where residents can then gather and commune. So you could have picnics or garden walks, places to just simply relax. Allotment gardens or plot gardens are gardens where participants rent garden plots for a fee, and they're maintained. The shared spaces are then maintained by the oversight group or organization. Therapy gardens, this is an opportunity to provide physical, emotional, or spiritual health or healing, either at a hospital, a clinic, a special needs school, can be a way to provide therapy as well as nutritious food to supplement what they're already preparing. Gardens at elderly care centers help inspire residents to get some exercise, fresh air, while also working with their fellow neighbors in a community setting. And then market gardens, these are community gardens that provide a source of income for gardeners, so that revenue is a benefit to the community. Local gardeners will sell their produce to individuals, restaurants, or farmers markets. This is an example of a demonstration garden. So this one is a floral and vegetable garden. So in the first half of the picture here, these are all flowers that have been grown to show members of the community new varieties that have just come out. This one was the Sun Garden, and it was all new plants that were coming out about the time that the impatiens were being affected by downy mildew. And so these were alternative plants that could be used. And then on the left side here, these are the vegetables that are being grown to show people how to grow plants. So this tomato right here is actually grown in a soil bag. There were some other tomatoes next to this that aren't in the picture that were being grown in laundry baskets. So utilizing what you had for a container garden, as well as showing them next to tomatoes in the soil. And then it's next to a cornfield, but you can see that there is a distance here so that if this corn was sprayed, it would provide some distance between the cornfield and the demonstration garden. And then any of this produce from the demonstration garden was then donated to a local organization in need. This one is just a simple vegetable garden. This is from one of our youth gardens, and you can see that it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and we're just planting in the middle of rows for our local communities. I promised you guys last week that you would get to see how terrible of a drawer I am, and so here's one of my sketches. This is from a garden that was just a simple four raised bed garden, and so I went out there with a tape measure, and I was taking measurements, putting together a drawing that then, using this drawing, I divided up these raised beds to say what I was planting, where I was planting, and then I did use a ruler for this, so the lines are a little straight. and I put a scale down here of how big the garden was. This is another garden. So this is that 60 by 100 square foot garden. And you can see this was just a quick sketch that I used. I wrote what crops were where, any pertinent information, if it was a hill system or if it was a row, put in the walkway, the compost pile, any staples that were in there. And then you can see this one is not as formal as the last one. It's just lines with words and rows of what was planted and where. So this was the quick, easy sketch. So there are some things to do before planting. And the big one on here is to develop that maintenance schedule. So if you're doing a community garden, who is going to help maintain that garden which weeks throughout the growing season? Obviously, there are some things to think about. Are you going to do it organically or conventionally? Do you have to amend the soil, till it up? Who's going to help pull weeds? A crop rotation schedule. So if you're going to do this for multiple years, putting the tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and potatoes in different spots, and having other crops from other families in there, in that spot the following year, to help the buildup of, to help reduce the buildup of any soil-borne pathogens. This photo here, I put this one in here because this is a crop that many of you may or may not have grown. This is edamame, which is the edible soybean. So edamame are 2 rows here. We have it surrounded by eggplants with the paper mache mulch, and then there are snap beans on the other side. And so this can be a training opportunity for your volunteers and participants to learn about growing a different vegetable that you may not have grown before. This is a different vegetable compared to green beans or purple beans or snap beans, because the window for harvesting edamame is 3 to 7 days. So if you don't get it during those 3 to 7 days when it's perfectly ripe, you're reducing the sugar content, affecting the flavor, and if they go too long, then they become inedible and they're very hard, like field soybeans. And so for these, if they do go too long, you can simply save those seed for next year. But this is an opportunity for your volunteers to learn about growing new crops, as well as I use this photo as a potential warning as well. So this plant is also a safety issue. If you have anybody visiting your garden or working in your garden who has a soy allergy, they need to know so that they stay away from these 2 plants. And depending on the allergy, they may choose to not work anywhere near this section, depending on the severity of that allergy. So this could be marked in a different way. Here I just have it with simple stakes, but you can see that they're overgrown. So this might be a crop that needs to be either rowed off or have a bigger sign up here that says, hey, this is a soybean plant. If you have a soy allergy, please do what you need to do to protect your safety. Just a quick slide on garden basics. So this will talk about orientation of where crops need to be. So the taller crops should be on the north side of your garden. That way the shorter crops will still get the full exposure to the sun, which will be on the south side of your garden and the west side of your garden during the summer growing season. Avoid trees and shrubs in your community garden unless you are going to do a community fruit tree garden or a community small berry patch. But that's another topic that we can talk about too, because then there are some more things to take into consideration. Also consider the garden size or plot size. Providing plant diversity, so not everybody growing the same plant. Not having 70 different varieties of tomatoes or 70 tomato plants that all mature at the same time, because then everybody's going to have to pitch in and harvest those tomatoes during a very short week-long period. Separate your plant families. So like I mentioned with the tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and potatoes. Have those in one area, have the cucumbers and squash in another, your root vegetables in another, and then rotate those around. If this is going to be an allotment garden, are you going to allow people to put in perennial crops such as asparagus that will keep coming back for 30 to 40 years? And then of course, don't forget walking paths, because it's always a good idea to give people a common space for them to utilize to walk through the gardens, so then nobody's stepping on anybody else's plants or produce. And then just one last slide here on garden responses. So if you are having issues in your garden, how are they handled? How do people file complaints? So if the person who rented spot A is spraying a pesticide and it goes against your community garden rules, or there was overspray and it got on person B, C, D, and E, their garden, how are those issues handled? And are there repercussions that your garden group has decided? How are you going to handle theft and vandalism? Because sadly it does occur. So people walking by, if this is a garden in a neighborhood, and they're just walking by, they might take something. Do you need any kind of security? So a fence, security camera, any light post, sign warnings. So in many cases for security, a sign is going to be enough warning to dissuade people that they shouldn't do something. So pests, and I'm not just talking about insect pests or disease pests. I'm talking about our four-legged friends here. How are they going to be handled? Do you put out deterrents? Some people would recommend for raccoons to use an electric fence, but then that provides a safety issue for your gardens and participants. How are you going to handle any trash that's left? People who abandon their garden, so they start off the season strong, but then either life comes up or they just decide to stop coming. How are you going to handle that? And then communication, simple communication for new developments for what's happening in the garden. And this can simply be an email list, a monthly newsletter, just simple ways for people to stay in communication with each other. Another way for communication is to have a garden mailbox. So just getting a mailbox, putting it at the entrance to the garden, and then if there's a newsletter or an important announcement or something's happening in the garden that you want to point out to participants, just putting that in there for people to pick up then. All right, so we went over our planning committee, site selection, site development, and how to organize a garden. And so I think I've seen a couple of questions in the chat box. So we'll go ahead and tackle those.
Great. Bruce, I think this is Janice again for those of you, and I'm attempting to monitor the chat box today. And the one, I've only seen one, I think, but the one that I've seen is, are there any guidelines for donation gardens in this era of COVID-19?
So that is a great question. And the recommendations that I have seen so far, and these come from extension sources based on USDA guidelines. Since COVID-19 is a respiratory virus, it has not been shown to affect any produce that have been, it won't stay on any produce that's been donated, making sure to follow proper washing of your produce. It doesn't stay on packaging long enough. The big thing is that if you are feeling, or if anybody who is helping harvest is feeling sick, tell them to stay home, tell them to stay away. Making sure that pickers are utilizing good safety practices, good handling practices, washing their hands when entering the garden, when walking around the garden, not to be touching their face or anything like that. Your local extension service is going to have guidelines for you specifically. I know at this time for the University of Illinois, we've asked our master gardeners and volunteers to not work in a community garden as the governor's order is in place to shelter in place. So going forward, there'll be more guidance that does come out as we learn more.
Another question, Bruce, was, and before we get to this question, because I know that there are some people who may need to leave, I have put into the chat box for our teachers who need CPDUs the link to fill out the evaluation, and then just return that to either Bruce or to me, and we'll get you your certificate of attendance. Master gardeners should just log their professional development hours in the way their county asks them to. They don't have to necessarily fill out that evaluation. So the next question is, can you please discuss paper mache mulch?
Sure. So this is actually one of those things that I actually learned about from a volunteer. And so paper mache mulch is simply taking shredded newspaper or shredded white paper and putting a little bit of water on it, turning it into essentially a paper mache by wetting it. And you're packing that around the base of the plant, and it is a form of biodegradable mulch. And so one of the things to think about is if you have any ink on this paper, making sure that it's the biodegradable kind of ink, which is usually based in soy. If you have any folks that have soy allergy, letting them know so that they're not helping during this time. And it's simply one of those mulches that stays in place and will break down as the season goes on. It's also great because as it dries, it clumps together and then it becomes a little bit wind resistant. So in this picture here with the kids, all we simply did was, you can see there's a bag here with the paper mache, and they're just putting handfuls of wet paper on there to keep that in place.
Thanks. Another question, would our local extension offices have boilerplate forms, policies, screening best practices, et cetera, that folks can have access to?
So we do have forms that we use, and if you talk to your local extension staff, they would be able to show you those forms and might let you use those to modify your own screening forms. For the, and Janice, you can help me with this one because I know you've signed a few of them. The background check and the sex offender checks, those are from the state of Illinois Police Department, right?
Yeah, that would depend on the organization that and what their policies are. In extension, we do a DCFS child abuse neglect tracking system, background check, and a police background check as well. But every organization may have a different procedure and policy that they would follow. Thanks to Rebecca, she put a link to produce production food safety, one of our COVID-19 resources, in the chat box as well. And those can be found on the homepage for Illinois Extension, which is simply illinois.extension.edu, and you can find all sorts of resources there. Two more questions I think about mulch, Bruce. One is the ink in inkjet printers biodegradable? I think my response to that might be that you would have to look at the label for the particular ink that you buy, and if it doesn't say, to reach out to the manufacturer.
Yep, that would be my response as well.
And then how fine do you shred the newspaper? Do you use a shredder or just rip it up?
So the easiest way for me was just to run it through a shredder. Those thin shreds that come out, or if you use a crosshatch shredder, you'll have finer pieces, but just running it through a regular paper shredder that gives you those nice strands is going to be well enough.
Great. And I think that's, Bruce, the last question that I see in the chat box. So unless you have anything else, I think we can close our webinar for today. And again, remind all those teachers to go to that link or reach out to us if you have any trouble.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you next weekend for our next our next Growing Horticulture in Northwest Illinois webinar. And to remind you, for those that have been asking, we are closed captioning last week's presentation as well as this week's presentation, and we'll get those posted to our YouTube page as soon as possible. My goal of having last week's done by today hit a technical glitch and all of those closed captions got wiped out. So I'm working to get those restored. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Janice, for moderating the chat box, and we will see everybody next week. I will send out the handouts and the slides email on Monday again next week like I did this week. So thank you very much.